You ever heard a story of a person that's lost at sea? In the summer of 2017, two longtime commercial fishermen, John Aldridge and Anthony Sosuski, sent out to fish at Montauk, Long Island. They headed out to sea about 40 miles offshore. Anthony went to sleep below deck. He thought it was a good idea. While John started to get things ready for their catch, he was pulling on a handle with all of his might when it snapped. It sent him sprawling backward, and guess what happened? He went right off the back of the ship. The boat was on autopilot, so it just kept on cruising. As soon as he resurfaced from under the water, John began screaming for help, even though he knew that Anthony, who was asleep below, could not hear him, and Anthony did not hear him. And so John watched the boat go over a wave and out of sight. Couldn't see it anymore. He was alone. He was treading water in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. He did not have a life vest, thinking that this was going to be the way he was going to die. Can you imagine what that must have felt like? If there's ever been a hopeless situation, that has to be it. Or is it? While John was trying to calm down and quiet his thoughts of certain doom and stay afloat, he realized that his boots were very buoyant. So he got this idea. He took one off, he emptied it out, and he plunged it back into the water so it created an air pocket. And it floated. It floated. So John stuck his boots under his arms as flotation devices. At least he could stay afloat. It was a flicker of hope. So John was thinking about his family. He was thinking about the fact that nobody anywhere knew that he was missing, except maybe the two sharks that were swimming around him. Thankfully, they didn't seem to care too much. So what do you do when you're out in the Atlantic Ocean, holding on for dear life, using your boots as flotation devices? Well, he set some goals, beginning with just living until morning. 4 hours later, Anthony woke up, the guy who was asleep in the bottom of the boat. He realized that John was gone. So what does he do? He calls the Coast Guard, and the Coast Guard begins the procedures to go search. And the commander admitted this, that he didn't have much hope. To find somebody in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, in the middle of open waters, was slim to none. And yet John made it alive to morning. And he tried to keep his hope alive. But the hours kept passing and there was no sign of help. But finally, out of nowhere, he spots a fishing buoy and was able to reach it and climb onto it. And so there was this new surge of hope that sprung within him. And in less than an hour, a Coast Guard helicopter flew nearby and spotted him waving and splashing. They pulled him up to safety. You know what? We've been looking for you for 9 hours. And he goes, well, I appreciate that. I've been looking for you for 12 hours. John answered that, really, this is a miracle. John Aldridge survived that whole thing. What a story. What an amazing story of hope. If it was one of you or me out there bobbing in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, we probably would have given up hope. But hope is the whisper of maybe. Hope is the whisper of maybe. Maybe these boats will float and I will survive. What hope is in your life this morning? For some, hope is the first candle to be lit when the power goes out because the storm just hit. Or maybe hope is the fact that you woke up and your house is still standing even though tornadoes were scattered in the area. Hope is the first day you wake up and you can breathe again after having that nasty cold. Maybe hope is that first ray of sunshine through your window after a terrible, tearful, and frightful night. Hope is the first soldier to land on the beach. It's hearing the words, he's going to be okay. It's the flicker of maybe, just maybe something's going to happen. And so that hope, it's what fuels our faith. It's what fuels our dreams. It's what we celebrate this first Sunday of Advent. The word Advent actually means coming or arrival. And this season we know is marked by expectation and waiting and anticipation and longing. And yet Advent is not just an extension of Christmas. It is a season where we can reflect on the past and the present and the future. And so Advent offers us the opportunity to share in that ancient longing for the coming of the Messiah, right? To celebrate his birth, to be alert of his second coming. Advent looks back in celebration at the hope of Jesus Christ coming in the manger, while at the same time looking forward in hopeful anticipation and eager anticipation of the coming of Christ when he returns in glory. Man, I long for that day. Advent is marked by active and hopeful waiting. And so in a season that's often characterized by frenzied busyness, right? You've got parties to go to, you've got things that are going on, gifts to buy, you've got all this stuff, crazy stuff happening. Advent is an opportunity to set aside time to prepare our hearts and to help us place our focus on a far greater story than our own, the story of God's redeeming love. It's a story of digging deep. A season of digging deep into the reality of what it means that God sent his Son into the world as Emmanuel, God with us. It is a season of expectation and preparation, an opportunity to align ourselves with God's presence more than the hectic season of buying presents. So wherever you are on your spiritual journey, I invite you into this season. Please understand that Jesus is God with us. In the darkness, the pain, the chaos, he comes to us. That's the way God's been working throughout history. And so we know in the beginning that God walked with Adam and Eve, right? Openly, he attended to their needs. He was with us. And humanity enjoyed wholeness and intimacy with God. But you know the story. Adam and Eve decided to choose sin. And so separation divided God and humans. And that brokenness has been on our world ever since. But do you realize that ever since that day, God has been working toward restoration, toward healing, and toward wholeness for us and all that he has made. This is God's big story. We can see it throughout. God making a way by giving and reminding his people of the hope that he is still at work. We see it in God's covenant with Abraham at the time he was called Abram. Look what it says in Genesis 12:3. And I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. That's God at work in the life of Abraham. When God encountered Jacob at Bethel, he renewed that covenant and reinforced the hope rooted in his faithfulness. Genesis chapter 28, verse 15. Behold, I am with you, and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I've done what I've promised you. That's an amazing promise, an amazing moment of hope. But you know, as time passed and as years and generations and centuries went by, we humans are an impatient breed. How long, God? How long is it going to be before you do something? That was the cry of the ancient Israelite people. And so from the times of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to David, Elijah, and Elijah to Isaiah, Jeremiah, and all the other prophets, there was this longing. There was this desire. And yet there was this repeated history of devotion and neglect of God. There was prosperity and there was recession. There was feast and there was famine. There was pleasure and pain. The Hebrew people aren't much different from us. When things were going good, what do? They forgot about their God. And yet when things went bad, what do? They cried out to him for his help. But through it all, there was a deep ongoing longing for God to fulfill his covenant and his promise of the Messiah who would come to make everything right. This wasn't just a happy idea that drifted in and out of the Israelites' consciousness and culture. This was their deep hope, their deepest hope that sustained them, encouraged them, and spurred them on, especially through thousands of years of uncertain waiting. And in the midst of that long journey of waiting, God speaks through Isaiah. God speaks through Isaiah. Isaiah is what Bible scholars call a major prophet. He wrote a lot, he taught a lot, he played a prominent role in Israel. He's still a famous guy to this day, though not always popular. He wasn't popular. Why? Because he was telling the people what they were doing wrong, and he actually told the leaders of the country that an empire is going to come and destroy you. Not a very popular thought, not a very popular sermon. But you might say Isaiah is the prophet for Advent, the season of longing, expectation, and hoping for God to be with us. You see, through Isaiah, God gave his people many prophecies and promises about the Messiah he would send one day. Isaiah, the voice of hope. We've already seen it. Isaiah 7:14. Look what it says. Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. Whenever you see that word behold, it means something extremely important is about to happen. And what is extremely important about to happen? It is the virgin birth. You will conceive and have a son. Of course, that's a reference to Jesus Christ. Even in Isaiah 9, verses 1 and 2, we read these words. But there will be no gloom for her who was in anguish. In the former time he brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the latter time he has made glorious the way of the sea, the land beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwell in land of deep darkness, on them has light shone. What's the significance of the land of Galilee? It's not just a camp near Clinton. What's the significance of Galilee? That's where Jesus' ministry took place. And what does it say about him? That he would shine a light in the darkness. A little later in the same chapter, Isaiah writes these words. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end. On the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time forth, and what? Forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. Could you imagine living in the ancient world? I mean, you don't have all this digital connection where you can Google stuff. You didn't have that. Could you imagine hearing this for the first time? Can you imagine the hope that it would bring in people's hearts? And so as we turn our attention to the Christmas narrative in Luke, we're looking at the person Zechariah, who would have been well acquainted with the words and prophecies of Isaiah. He's a priest. And Luke describes this priest as somebody who is righteous and blameless. He's a good Jewish follower of God and a spiritual leader to his people. And so he undoubtedly understands the prophecies of Isaiah. He understands the deep longings for the Messiah. But Zechariah stands in shock. Why does he stand in shock? Because suddenly out of nowhere, on an ordinary day, when he's just performing his priestly duties, God drops a mega dose of hope onto him. It's been 400 years since Israel had heard anything. There had been no prophetic voice or message from God. 400 years. Think about how long that is. I mean, the United States is only 242 years old. About 400 years ago, Johannes Kepler, the famous scientist, was discovering his planetary laws. North America was still unexplored by the Europeans, and Jamestown was just been settled. So when an angel shows up and tells Zechariah that he's going to have a son, it's a shock. And what does Luke say about this son in Luke 1:17? He will go before him in the spirit and power of Elijah to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and to the disobedient to the wisdom of the just, to make ready for the Lord a people prepared. That's a story about John the Baptist coming to prepare the way for Christ. He knows the significance. Zechariah knows the significance. He knows the prophecies of the Messiah, and he knows that this miraculous occurrence is going to be awesome. Israel's hope is alive again. And so maybe you're just thinking, I mean, we're living in 2018. And you're wondering, okay, that's all nice and great for those people thousands of years ago, but what about me? What about us? What about all of us living in this American culture so many years removed? What about it? What about those people who are fighting cancer and other maladies? What about those whose spouse has walked out on them? Or what about those whose spouse has had to travel halfway across the world to fight in a war? Or maybe what about those people who've lost their job without any warning, and they have bills to pay, and they have credit cards and debt that's stacking up? No matter what kind of problems or what kind of struggles we are facing right now, no matter what kind of season of darkness or pain that we might be in, I'm offering this encouragement to you today. Let's not abandon hope. Let's not give up on it. Hope is still alive. Even in your deepest pain, even in your most hopeless circumstance, hope is alive. Why? Why is hope alive? Because God is with us. That's why. How can we know? How can we find that tiny spark of hope when we're on the verge of giving up? I think there's 3 beacons through which God's hope comes to us during this Advent season. No matter what kind of circumstances we are facing, let's look at them. The first beacon is this: there is hope based on God's Word. You see, part of the God with us experience is the written Word that He's given to us. This is where His promises are to His people, both long ago and even to us today. They are a piece of Him. They remind us that He can penetrate our hearts and assure us that no matter what we are facing, no matter how bleak tomorrow looks, no matter how bad the pain is, God will never leave us nor forsake us. Why? Because nothing can separate us from His love. Consider these words from Psalm 139. Where shall I go from your spirit? Or where shall I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you're there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. Sheol's the place of the dead. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall come over me, and the light about me be night, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is bright as the day, for darkness is as light with you. Do you feel the hope in those words? Do you sense the presence of God in those words and how that brings hope to us? We are not alone. No matter what you're experiencing, no matter where you are, no matter what struggle you're going through, no matter what victory you're experiencing today, we are never alone. God means with us. He is with us, and that will always be with us, and nothing can take that away. And so you read the Scriptures and you see them filled with stories and promises that rekindle hope within us. As we move through this Advent season, let me encourage you to dig deep into the words of the Bible expectantly, because God is with us. We have the hope that we are never alone. There's a second beacon I want to talk about this morning, and that's this. There is hope based on God's character. We have hope because of who He is. We have hope because of who He is. There's this small story in the book of Mark. It's found in Mark chapter 5. That's easy to overlook, but it's a great story of hope. It's about an anonymous woman with a bold hope. Do you understand that this woman for 12 years suffered from an issue of bleeding? The bleeding would not stop. 12 years she experienced this pain and agony, and no one was able to help her. She went to doctors who couldn't help her. But the woman's condition would only grow worse. It's a condition that affected everything about her every day of her life. If you know somebody, or if you yourself have experienced some kind of long-term disability, you can relate to this lady. This woman is considered unclean because of her bleeding issue, and she's treated as an outcast. She can't even find love from the people around her. They don't understand what she's dealing with, and probably she doesn't understand it either. Have you ever been misunderstood? That's probably what she's experiencing. And yet hope awakens in her heart. Why? Because she hears about Jesus, that's why. She hears about Jesus, and she understands that He is doing some miracles and that He's healing people, and she believes it. The hope of healing and new life drives her to do something. If I could just get close enough to Him, if I could just touch Him, then I would be healed. If I could just touch His clothes, then I will experience healing. If Jesus is who He claims to be, then He can heal me. It may be a small action for us, but for her it was everything, just to get close enough to Jesus. You see, she hopes in him. When she hears, it makes all the difference in the world. Do you think it was hard for her? Could you imagine all the commotion and the chaos and the huge crowds and all of the stuff that was happening around Jesus because word was getting out that he was healing people and performing all these miracles? Do you think it was hard for her? Absolutely it was hard for her. But her hope kept her going. And then when she touches Jesus, she feels a bit scared because Jesus finds out, who touched me? The disciples are like, how do you know somebody touched you? There's all these people around. There's this huge crowd, and you're wondering who touched you? It's because Jesus felt power leave him. The woman must have frozen in that pregnant, powerful second. On the one hand, she knew she experienced healing. On the other, she was about to pay a harsh penalty for her presumption. Jesus, it was me. I touched you. I'm sorry I touched you. And yet Jesus connects with her deeply and directly as God with us. And the healing and the peace and the freedom that he gives her changes her life. This is our God, and this is his character. Love, healing, attention. Jesus was and still is God with us. He fulfilled Israel's hope for the Messiah when he arrived in that first early days. He fulfilled humanity's hope for victory over death when he was resurrected from the dead. And one day he will ultimately fulfill all hope that completes God's work of restoration for all creation. He is the promise that gives us confidence and boldness. Matthew chapter 28, verse 20. Great words to hear. I am with you always, even to the end of the age. These are words that fuel our hope. And God is true to his character, and we can hope in him. All right, a final beacon this morning. There is hope based on God's faithfulness. Based on God's faithfulness. Do you have any memories? Do you have any stories of when God showed up in your life? You know those things that happen and you're like, that was God. That was God's Spirit. He did something. He showed me something. God is faithful. And so it's important to look back in our past to understand what God has done, because when we do that, we can anticipate what he's going to do. I love that. The presence of God's Spirit is with us. Gratitude is actually what breeds hope. I remember when you were there, I remember when you did that, and I remember what happened as a result. And so acknowledgement and appreciation bring hope. Listen to these words from Jeremiah found in the book of Lamentations. Have you ever read Lamentations? You probably don't even know it's in your Bible. It's not a popular book. Jerusalem was destroyed. Jeremiah is walking through the rubble. It's a completely agonizing, traumatizing experience for all the Israelites. And yet these are the words that Jeremiah pens in the book of Lamentations. But this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I will hope in him. The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul who seeks him. It is good that one should wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. Did you catch the beginning of that? Did you hear that? But this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. I remember when God did that. I remember when God was faithful. And that's going to bring me hope because he's going to be faithful again. And so Jeremiah understands that there's hope in the future when we remember what God has done in the past. He knows that hope shines like a fire. It flows like water and grows like a seed even amid the rubble. Focusing on gratitude will renew and grow our hope. Recognizing and appreciating the good that God has shown us in the past can increase our hope for all that he will do in the future. And sharing in this gratitude can sustain us through our darkest days as we wait for God to move. Romans 15:13, Paul says this, "May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing, so that by the power of the Holy Spirit you may abound in hope." These are words of encouragement to a very contentious church. And yet Paul says you can have hope because of Christ in you, within you, and among you. Our vision is engaging the world with God's love as equipped and empowered followers of Christ. You've been equipped today with a message of hope. Jesus is with you. He's working in you, among you, with you to do something great. You've been empowered to go out and share that message of hope. So if you want to engage the world with God's love, if you really want to do that, and we're called to do that, it's part of our discipleship, share your hope with somebody. I don't care who it is. Share the hope that you have. We don't want people to miss out on this. God, we love you very much. And as inspiring as the story was of the gentleman who survived in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean because he didn't give up hope, I pray that you will help us in our desert, in our struggle, that we will not give up hope, knowing that you are alive, that you are with us, that Jesus is present, that your Spirit is working. And I don't care how dark it gets, how gloomy it gets, how chaotic it gets, how overcoming life can be at times. We can never forget, we must never forget your presence in our life and the hope that that brings. Thank you so much for being faithful. Help us to be faithful to you.